But, I mean, Steve's right, actually, there, isn't there, on that point? I mean, let's bring in the Matt Hancock story. There it is, front page of the Telegraph as well as the Mirror. The Grin Reaper. Hancock wanted a final say on who lived or died. Now, I'm sure, Cindy, it wasn't quite like that. I don't imagine there was a meeting when he said, can I just, in any other business, he suddenly said, I'd like to, could I have the final say? I don't think any of that happened, but nonetheless, it does, and Hancock has become a more curious character as time has gone on. For many, many reasons. But Steve is right. I mean, they are a peculiar bunch, aren't they?
They are a peculiar bunch, and we see more about Matt Hancock now as he goes on numerous reality TV shows, where it does seem like attention is what he wants most of all, rather than necessarily serving the country. You know, he did talk about how he went to I'm a Celebrity to fund this dyslexia charity, one that he's now not setting up after all.
Yes.
So it just raised questions, and I think Matt Hancock specifically hasn't come out well in a COVID inquiry. He actually just seems quite excited to have the responsibility given to him at this moment of national emergency, but almost giddy with that responsibility rather than thinking, oh my gosh, I really need to be very grounded.
It was insane. We found out yesterday he was playing cricket in number 10 when stuff was going on. He said he had a dossier all ready to go, but no one ever found it.
We know he was having an affair at the time as well.
He was having an affair, and he was caught in the little room round the back there, where there was a handy camera hanging around that caught the grope and the snog. And now we understand that he wanted to play God. This was according to Lord Stevens at the inquiry earlier today. When they talked quite legitimately about, you know, what happens if the NHS is overwhelmed, he wanted to be the person who had the responsibility. And Lord Stevens, of course, he led the NHS, said he didn't think that should be in the hands of a health secretary, which is not an unreasonable thing to say.
And look, you know, hospitals do play God, medical services do play God, because that's what triaging is. You know, you have to decide, do you go for the 15-year-old who's been in a train accident, a car accident, or whatever, or do you go for the 70-year-old who has got terminal cancer? You know, medical professionals make these decisions all the time. But clearly something here is that Matt Hancock is saying during the pandemic, this should be a political decision, and that should rest with the Department for Health, and something that Simon Stevens did not seem to agree with. And actually, it just seemed like throughout all of the testimonies people have been given in the inquiry, how few people actually trusted Matt Hancock to even be telling the truth. You know, you had Helen McNamara, the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary, saying that she didn't really trust him. You had Dominic Cummings, who apparently is an enemy of Helen McNamara, also saying that he didn't trust Dominic Cummings. Simon Stevens now coming out. You know, he could be a scapegoat for all of this, or it could actually just be that he wasn't the right man for the job at that time.
But I guess at that point it was quite hard to replace him during, you know, when it was going on. But, I mean, from your perspective, Steve, I mean, he's the gift that keeps on giving, Matt.
Well, I suppose, yeah, because he keeps going reality TV show and he says he just wants to show the nation the real him. We've seen it. We don't like it. How many times do you have to repeat this until you work this out? But it's not just that he's the wrong person for the wrong job. That's bad enough, I suppose. But to believe that you are so good at that job that you're better than medically trained people at making life and death decisions. That's ridiculous. The level of hubris there, I can't even fathom. So the idea that he thinks he should be the one making life and death decisions because he's so good, his judgment is so good. Just as, to put it in context, the man who judged Isabel Oakeshott is a really good person to send all of the WhatsApps to. That's how good his judgment is. And he'd want to be making life and death decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, of course, this isn't over yet, so I'm sure there's more Hancock-esque revelations, Cindy, to come.
Yes, unfortunately, and I think that's the biggest shame about this inquiry is that, you know, we're sitting here talking about he said, she said, who didn't like who, what Matt Hancock got up to, but actually what we should be talking about is the institutional failures here. You know, why was it that actually so much of the pandemic response felt very, you know, unscientific, actually, when politicians are saying follow the science? The very idea that there is just one science is in itself very unscientific. And so questions like, in the next pandemic, have we actually learned any lessons? I'm not sure this inquiry is actually giving us answers to that, other than just the psychodrama that was happening in government at the time.
And it was completely mad, wasn't it? I mean, there was, you know, we were told there was a vague template that the governments had meant to sort of roughly go, the go-to bullet point list. If a pandemic comes snaking its way around your place, here's what you do roughly. And apparently they didn't do any of that, just did their own thing. And their own thing was not so much nothing at all, but it was many different things, and it all clashed and nobody spoke to each other. And there was chaos and people running around like headless chickens, and the people that did know stuff were never asked, and the people that didn't know stuff were always asked. And then they gave, at the end of the day, this veneer of authority and authenticity in these press conferences, as we had Whitty and Vallance and Boris in the middle. Sometimes it was one of the others, which made it look as if, a big, nice oak panel backdrop in number 10, made it look as if they were, these are the people that are looking after us. And yet behind that oak panel backdrop, there was a party going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that you've just described it, I think, is so symptomatic of a team working under Boris Johnson's leadership. You know, this is just definitely how his leadership style is. From people who've worked with him, they all say, he doesn't like making this kind of decision. He doesn't like bringing opinions together. He talks to different people, finds it hard to make a decision out of them, and whoever talks to him last is whatever opinion he ends up having.
That's
very
just
concerning.
Bizarre, right?
Yeah. There's a fast show character like that, isn't there? He governed like that.
And so I think in the pandemic, they had their flu plan for pandemic, and they believed in herd immunity in that plan, actually. And I do wonder, this is a counterfactual, so I don't know for sure, but if China hadn't locked down in the way that it did, would the rest of the world also lock down? It did seem that China locked down, they were seeing the horrific images coming from Italy at the time, and they just panicked.
Yeah,
and
I think that's what it was.
Very kind of herd mentality rather than herd immunity.